Now that my favorite games of 2017 are out of the way, it's time to do something that I haven't done before, my top 5 most disappointing games of the year. It's important to note that when I call a game disappointing, I'm not necessarily asserting that it was outright bad. If that was the case, this list would be populated entirely by random Unity Engine games I found on Steam Early Access. While that would be fun in its own right, I'm instead going to be talking about games that I had genuine interest in and that I felt underdelivered. I did written reviews for all but one of these games, and I'll have links to them in the description. As a huge fan of the first 3 Uncharted games, Uncharted 4 was a disappointment, and outside of the epilogue, I can't name a single moment I remember from it. I was hoping this one would have more personality since it featured Chloe Frazer, but the inclusion of Nadine, one of the most boring new characters from Uncharted 4, made me slightly uneasy. I was thinking that they got all of the serious stuff out of their system with Uncharted 4, so maybe they would relax a little with this one and bring back some of the fun atmosphere and excitement that made 2 and 3 so memorable. All I wanted out of Lost Legacy was for it to be more fun or at least more free-spirited than Uncharted 4, but I don't think it ended up being either of those things. The characters and their interactions are dry, the villain is laughable, and nothing was done to change up the gameplay formula. Since the level design is basically paint by numbers at this point, and the narrative is so weak, the only thing Lost Legacy can lean on is its visuals. Yes, it looks fantastic, even on the standard PS4, but this time around, I feel like it's only in a technical sense. Almost all of the game is spent in densely vegetated areas that are eerily reminiscent of the final area in Uncharted 4, which I thought was one of the most artistically bland areas in the entire series. And the world is about as exciting as the little-known PS Vita spin-off game Golden Abyss. If Uncharted 4 was the disappointing main course, Lost Legacy was the underwhelming dessert that came after. It's not bad, but it is the most inessential thing that Naughty Dog has released since the original Uncharted. We live in a world so oversaturated with Star Wars merchandising to the point where even fruits and vegetables aren't safe. So it really says something about how badly EA's Star Wars deal is going when I'm starving for Star Wars games. Back in 2013, when the deal was signed, I would have guessed that I'd be fucking sick of Star Wars games by now, begging for them to stop like I was with Telltale games for a while. Instead, in 2015, we got a $60 Battlefront tech demo made by DICE, the studio behind Battlefield. I thoroughly disliked that tech demo, so when I saw footage of the sequel and it looked pretty good, I was shocked. They implemented a class system, heroes and ships weren't power-ups on the map, and it included maps from all 3 film eras. It seemed like the game had unlimited potential, and for the first few hours that I played it, it burned bright. But after that initial honeymoon phase was over, I came to realize that it had some deep flaws that kept it from becoming something that I would invest more time into. The biggest issue is the progression system or lack thereof. Instead of leveling or doing challenges, you get star cards from loot packs, which you can also buy with real money. Okay, so you can't buy them anymore, but it's still a bad system because it's completely random and hopeless, so The main mode, Galactic Assault, also quickly becomes stale, as there are only so many ways in which these linear maps can play out. The one thing this game absolutely must have the next time around is a higher player count. I have no idea what their reason is for the low player count. If anything, you'd think Battlefront would have a larger player limit than Battlefield, but that's not the case. Then there's the campaign. Normally, in a multiplayer-centric game, I don't care too much about the single-player component, but so far EA have not put out any single-player Star Wars games, and the one that they did have in development was unceremoniously cancelled, so this is all we have for the foreseeable future. Unfortunately, the campaign ended up being a typical bad guys become good story with these weird knockoff versions of classic Star Wars characters sprinkled in for good measure.
I heard you call out. Sounded like you needed help.
In some ways, Battlefront 2 was sort of close to being what I wanted, but at the same time, it's still so far away. Because of the massive controversy surrounding the microtransactions, most people that would have bought the game didn't, leading to less than stellar sales. Those poor sales will probably lead to the free DLC being cut back, or maybe even outright cancelled. Unless you can get this for dirt cheap, I don't recommend buying it. After successfully rebooting both Wolfenstein and Doom, I thought Bethesda were on a hot streak. So when I saw that they were rebooting Prey, a slightly obscure game from 2006 with a notoriously cancelled sequel, I was excited. It didn't have anything to do with the previous game, but I was still convinced it could be a great game. It was being made by Arcane Studios after all, the creators of the Dishonored series. Oh, how wrong I was. Prey was easily the most boring thing I played in 2017, and that's the thing about this game. It's not offensively bad in any particular way, but the consistent lack of enthusiasm in every facet of the game adds up to an utterly bland experience. The level design isn't bad at all, but there's little incentive to partake in it. You won't find many exciting weapons, and the new abilities mostly exist to allow access to new areas, so the only other reason to explore would be for the world and the atmosphere, which is completely lifeless. Most of the documents I found were blasé conversations between crew members, and the voice acting is so stiff you would swear it was a low-budget dub of a Japanese game no one cares about.
Dr. Yu, were you up in crew quarters? Have you seen any sign of my wife, Nicole? Last I heard from her, she was on her way there. If you find her, can you help get her here? The thought that she may have become one of those creatures, I'm sorry, Dr. Yu, that was out of line. Forgive me.
Ekaterina, it's been so long since I've seen you.
Yes, it feels like years.
I'll take that as a compliment.
When I went back to watch my review, I couldn't believe just how boring it was. It was like the game's lack of enthusiasm rubbed off on me. The one thing I forgot about since then was how odd the controls felt. I spent my first 2 hours changing the mouse sensitivity, making sure motion blur and VSync were off. I even tried playing with a controller, but the FPS mechanics just never felt quite right. Some of the blame probably lies on the odd decision to put the reticle on the bottom half of the screen, like the original Halo games. I've only ever seen this done in console games, and even then, it's exceedingly rare. I have no idea why they decided to do that, especially on PC. There's more little things to talk about too, like how the default audio levels were completely fucked, and even with adjustment never sounded right, or how the graphics are dated, and the Art Deco visual style feels like a less iconic version of BioShock's Rapture, but the real issue with Prey is that it didn't feel finished. Not because it was broken or didn't run properly, but because something is missing from it. The game feels like it was cobbled together as a side project by different teams of people who didn't care if it all came together to create a compelling experience. Prey made me question everything, not because of its try-hard ending, but because now I'm not sure if gameplay is always enough to carry a game. If the level design was to remain identical, but the story, world, atmosphere, and characters were overhauled, I think it's possible that I might have had a completely different reaction to the game. 2014 was not the best year for games. Big-name titles like Destiny, Titanfall, and Far Cry 4 were underwhelming, which led to many more hours of Mario Kart 8 being played than I initially anticipated. Aside from Mario Kart, my two favorite games of the year were Forza Horizon 2 and Wolfenstein: The New Order. Wolfenstein was a game that, for me, came out of nowhere. It was the polar opposite of Wolfenstein 2009, and the deeply serious story and well-crafted, oppressive world drew me in. When this sequel was announced at Bethesda's E3 conference, I wasn't sure what to think. The trailer made it out to be more cartoonish and silly than the first game, which is not the direction I was looking for, but I knew I would get around to playing the game eventually. And I did, when the game went on sale for $30 soon after release. Why did it go on sale so quickly? Probably because it wasn't selling well. Why it didn't sell well is anyone's guess, but my theory is that the aggressive marketing campaign for the game backfired by appealing to a demographic that doesn't actually buy games like this. Now, Wolfenstein is different than the rest of the games on the list, since I wasn't only disappointed by it, but I actually thought it was an outright bad game. It felt like none of the things I enjoyed about the first game were leveraged here, and instead, the game's bizarre politics and awkward attempts at social commentary took center stage. I'm not going to get into the content of the game's politics, but I will comment on how terribly they were integrated into the game. Machine Games decided that the best way to do it would be by shoving aside the old characters and introducing new ones that are easily the worst characters of any game I played this year. The new characters aren't characters. They're cartoon versions of political agendas, but if they were actual characters, why should the player care about them? They spend most of the game insulting the player character for simply existing, and in the context of the narrative, they have no real reason to be there. I can't recall a single mission where they or their people contributed anything of substance to a mission, outside of calling BJ an idiot and telling him what to do. You've got the Black Panther woman and her human punching bag of a husband, as well as the Southern Communist guy that appears out of nowhere towards the end of the game. His introductory cutscene is painful to watch. It's just split your head in half terrible, and it feels completely out of place in the context of the game.
Poor. Well, everyone who ain't part of the American goddamn bourgeois. A brawler, cutter, a true believing anarchist. Got them eyes, can see a speck of dirt in a cow's ass off 100 yards. Going out in a blaze of glory, hallelujah! What's so yellow? We've been fighting for a revolution since long before them Nazis came here. We were the first to start building a civil rights movement to advocate equality for everyone. You know the concept of civil rights, Terabelli? No, you don't. You're just a jarhead, ain't you? Against the imperialist war machine of the United States of America and the greedy money men of Wall Street who was itching to send the children of the proletariat off the dying cause. Drunk, Terabelli, you upstanding lackey of the establishment, Jake. Yes, fuck you. I got kids on the way.
This game won awards for narrative and writing. That just boggles my fucking mind. The small fragments of story that are there are all over the place and hard to pin down, and none of them ever really lead to anything. There has to be at least 6 half-baked subplots going on at the same time, and the game is not able to juggle them gracefully. One minute it's all about BJ's abusive father, and the next it's all about Frau Engel. Then there's BJ's childhood friend, Frau Engel's daughter, Anya and BJ's relationship, and here's the really crazy thing. The game is actually quite short at 8 hours, yet it spends a lot of that time dicking around, making everything that they tried and failed to shove in there that much more incoherent and rushed. It's not only the story, characters, and world that pale in comparison to the original though. The gameplay is also inexplicably worse. The first game featured stealth, but you could just as easily play like a complete madman. In this sequel, it felt like I was being punished for my run-and-gun tactics. There's this one part where the first thing you have to do is find cover, or else you die immediately. This perfectly encapsulates what the gameplay is like. Not fun, and in complete contrast to the tone and attitude of the game. If Wolfenstein 2 was just mediocre, it would have been far lower on this list, or maybe not on it at all. But it has a tendency to be so in-your-face bad that it still managed to disappoint me, even when I didn't have any grand expectations for it in the first place. I wasn't one of those people who went into Destiny 2 expecting a vastly improved game, and yet I was still massively disappointed. All I wanted was to be able to play more of the game on my platform of choice, PC. So here I am, with the game finally in the technical state I always wanted it to be in, but with the actual content and gameplay at an all-time low. It's as if they sat down at the first pre-production meeting and asked, "Hey guys, any ideas for the new Destiny game?" And then one of their guys raised his hand and he's like, "Hey boss, I've got one, let's remove some features." And the boss is like, "Oh wow, that's amazing, I can't believe we didn't think of that sooner. Alright, so what kind of features are we talking here?" "Okay, remember all those small features we spent the past few years adding to the game due to community requests? All that stuff, yeah. Let's get rid of some of those, I think the players will really like that." "Oh yeah, I can definitely get behind that." Then this intern is walking down the hall and he overhears this meeting and he realizes that this is his chance to impress everyone and get a full-time job, so he kicks down the door and he says, "That's fucking child's play. Get ready for this. We remove the ability to pick what game mode you play in multiplayer." That intern would go on to become the lead director of Destiny 2. I can't wrap my head around why they would remove features that they spent years creating, let alone features that were in the 1.0 version of the game. It makes even less sense when you remember that this is Bungie. They love to reuse things as much as possible, so why start from zero again? It's not just features though. They've managed to completely subdue the core FPS gameplay, the one thing they always had going for them. Instead of having a primary weapon, special weapon, and heavy weapon, you now have two primaries, and all of the weapons that used to occupy the special slot are now relegated to the heavy slot where they have to compete with weapon types that are blatantly more powerful, immediately nullifying entire classes of weapons like snipers and shotguns because there's no reason to use them when something as powerful as a rocket launcher goes in the same slot. While some supers have been changed to roaming, I feel like they're still overall less impactful than Destiny 1, and the rate at which you get them is far slower than it used to be. The little bit of class customization that was in the original game is now gone and replaced with 2 trees for each class. And then the most disappointing for me was what they did with the exotics. Some exotics returned from the first game, but only the boring ones like Mida Multitool, which is also one of the few exotic quest weapons in the game for some reason. Instead of changing the way you play in exciting ways, most exotics are now situational at best and a handicap at worst. Half the reason I enjoyed Destiny was because of the memorable weapons. Hawkmoon, Vex Mythoclast, The Last Word, Sleeper Simulant, Zalo Supercell, Touch of Malice. I cannot think of a single weapon in Destiny 2 that comes even close to any of those. Sturm, the Prospector, Graviton Lance, Darcy, these weapons are bland and they're straight garbage when compared to normal legendaries. You never feel more powerful in this game, just slightly less shitty. All of this was seemingly done for the sake of balance in PvP, because balancing PvP and PvE separately is apparently too difficult. And it's not like there's a good reason for a game like this to be so obsessively attempting to achieve balance. Destiny is clearly not a competitive esports game, and it never, ever will be. It does not need to be perfectly balanced, it needs to be fun, and Destiny 2's PvP is not fun. So things were not going well since launch, and then the first DLC, Curse of Osiris, came out. This fucking DLC. If it weren't for the short but sweet raid layer, I probably would have given this thing a 3 out of 10 or worse. It's really that offensively bad. The breaking point for me was not the short campaign full of filler content or the reuse of old Destiny 1 exotics. It was the 2 new strike missions that are just story missions with matchmaking. Destiny has been reusing content since it came out, but never have I seen it on that level. But the most ominous sign that Destiny 2 was in freefall was the negative reaction from the community. Most Destiny YouTubers, even those who I would consider to be Bungie defenders, have been posting videos detailing the awkward position that they're now in. They're not able to produce video content for Destiny 2 the same way they were for the first game, so a lot of these guys are now branching out into other games like Fortnite, PUBG, and Monster Hunter. The reason I think that's such a big deal is because these are the people that held the game together back in year 1. The people that are responsible for keeping the game alive, even when it didn't really deserve it. Destiny has managed to survive this long because of its community, and right now, that community is evaporating at an alarming rate. Bungie has been scrambling to improve their communication with the player base, and they recently put out a timeline for feature updates. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the things on this timeline are features from Destiny 1, features that I want back, but who the fuck wants to go through this again? We already had to wait for private matches and increased vault space in Destiny 1, so why do we have to wait for them again in Destiny 2? Isn't the point of a sequel to expand upon its predecessor? I just can't understand what happened here. It's like being back at square one for no good reason. Who would want to go through what they did with the first game for a second time? Then there's all these mini controversies that pop up every few weeks, like the Eververse items in the Dawning event and XP throttling. It just never fucking ends. Destiny 2 is an enigma. I can't even begin to guess what went wrong. Maybe there's a good reason, maybe there isn't, but for the player, it doesn't matter either way. This was easily the biggest disappointment of 2017 for me, and I'm not sure Destiny is going to be able to recover for a second time. Let me know what your most disappointing games of 2017 were down below, and be sure to check out my top 5 games of 2017 video if you haven't already. Until next time, thanks for watching.